Think bigger. Dig deeper. It's time to elevate the conversation.
It's one thing if you love a song and can't stop singing it, but there's something incredibly frustrating about something popping into your head when you don't want it to, when you don't give it consent to be there. And while we can't necessarily stop it when a song or even some thoughts pop into our head, we do have a voice when it comes to what we allow for ourselves and our relationships. Consent is simply means agreeing to do something or allowing something to take place. So imagine you have a big pile of carne asada fries right in front of you. Imagine you're hanging out with a friend having lunch and you ordered these. And I don't know about you, but when I order food, that's my food and I don't want to share with anybody else. But now imagine that your friend reaches over without permission and grabs a few fries. They didn't ask. They just took what they wanted. That's an example of no consent being given. Now imagine that situation going just a little bit differently. Maybe your friend looks at you after the fries come out and asks if they can have some. To you, some means a few, so you say yes. And they reach over and grab a handful. I'm talking like 30, not just 5. That's not some. You gave them consent to take fries, but you were not consenting for them to take more than just a few. Finally, imagine fries on your tray, right in front of you, piping hot, ready to go. And they ask for permission and they wait for you to hand them what you're willing to give. That is consent. Consent is one tool we can all use to help our relationships stay in a good place. While we typically hear that word used in the context of dating and sex, it actually applies to a lot more than just that. Consent is pretty important, and it's an important thing for us to be talking about. But the truth is, the idea of consent shows up all over the place in culture. In other words, consent often answers the question most of us are really asking when we're trying to decide what to do. The real question often is, will I get in trouble? On a really basic level, when it comes to how we treat other people, most of us behave with a minimum requirement mindset. Instead of asking ourselves what we should do to treat the other person well or to build them up, we tend to look for the least we can do while not getting in trouble and still getting what we want. As humans, our temptation is always to do the least amount of good behavior that we should and the maximum amount of bad behavior that we can get away with. If you've been on the receiving end of this kind of behavior or pressure and what you wanted wasn't considered, then you don't need me to tell you how bad and confusing it feels, right? Now, don't get me wrong, consent matters. But when I think about the story of my friends, the students and the adults I know who have been in similar situations, I find myself wondering, is consent really the best standard? When it comes to your relationships as a mature person, you have to answer this question because it will drive so many of your decisions. If you're a Jesus follower, this is an even bigger deal. I'm talking about how you treat people, what you ask for, what you try to talk others into, and what you try to talk them out of. In this passage, Paul is talking about a group of Christians who lived in Rome. Paul was passionate about Jesus followers treating each other well. So a lot of his letters focused on that. Jesus brought a whole new way to view yourself and others. Back then, people didn't have assumptions about what it meant to be a Christian like they do today. So the best way for people to judge what they thought Christianity was all about was to look at the people who claimed to follow Jesus. And with that in mind, here's what Paul wrote. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. Let's be real here. But if you actually think about it, how many people actually do this? People don't look out for each other and protect each other unconditionally. So it was totally on you to treat people well. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. Right? How often do we see that take place in our lives or in our community? if you actually think about it, not a lot of people, right? People don't look out for each other and protect each other unconditionally. It's just not in human nature. Paul here is helping us see a better way to live. In Paul's world, suggesting that we show honor for everyone as a standard would have been wild. But for Paul, Jesus changed everything. Because of this, he passionately pushed people to do the same thing, to elevate the way that we value people for who they are, what they want, and what they don't want. And I love the word that Paul used there. It wasn't just consent. It was a step above that. It was honor. If you respect someone, you do so much more than just the bare minimum. Kind of like a song that gets stuck in your head, like we mentioned earlier. If you've been in a situation where you didn't give consent and you're wondering why it feels as bad as it does, this is why. You were not honored or respected. On the other hand, if you've only treated someone else with the bare minimum amount of consideration, doing the absolute least has communicated the same message to them. They aren't highly valued, they aren't respected, and they aren't honored. When it comes to the way that we treat each other, especially those of us that follow Jesus, we're called to do so much more than just the bare minimum. So what does this look like to expect honor? It looks like not settling for actions that don't honor. Determine what honor looks like to you, and what it means for people to see the image of God in you. Sometimes that can be really hard, but with practice, speaking up about small things, we can learn to be more comfortable when the stakes are higher. Consent is where honor begins, not where it ends. Simply because someone says yes to something doesn't mean it's what's best or what's honoring. Consent is important, yes, really important, but we're called to do something higher. Expressing honor means stopping right there. You can and should still expect and express honor. You and others deserve it, and nothing can take that away. If that is you, part of elevating the way that we talk about consent and honor is speaking up and sharing what happened with someone you love or trust, so that you can begin to work through it together. Sometimes a topic like consent can make us feel uncomfortable or even confused about what we're supposed to do. I want you to think about this one question as you leave here today. What does it look like to elevate, honor, and respect, and expect, and express honor in your daily life? What does it really look like to hold that true and near to your heart?
Think bigger. Dig deeper. It's time to elevate the conversation.